In the quiet history of the human spirit, there is a recurring pattern that defines every soul who has ever shifted the course of civilization. A pattern that Ralph Waldo Emerson captured with the immortal phrase that to be great is to be misunderstood. We live in a society that is obsessed with clarity, consensus, and the comfort of the familiar. From our social media algorithms that feed us exactly what we already believe, to the corporate structures that reward the predictable, we are conditioned to believe that if people don't understand us, we must be doing something wrong. We fear the raised eyebrow, the confused silence, and the judgmental whisper. But if we look at the giants of the past, the thinkers, the rebels, and the visionaries who built the world we now inhabit, we find that their greatness was almost always born in the fertile soil of being misunderstood. When Emerson tells us that Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates, and Jesus, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton, he is reminding us that the human mind is naturally resistant to the new. If you are saying something that everyone immediately agrees with, then you aren't saying anything new. You are simply echoing the status quo. To offer a new vision to the world is to speak a language that the world has not yet learned. It is like trying to explain the sunrise to someone who has lived their entire life in a cave. They will not thank you. They will call you a liar or a fool. But this misunderstanding is not a sign of your failure. It is the ultimate validation of your originality. Greatness requires a departure from the average, and the average is where most people feel safe. When you step out of that safety, when you refuse to follow the well-worn paths of tradition and popular opinion, you create a vacuum of understanding. People cannot categorize you, and because they cannot categorize you, they cannot control you. This is why society reacts so sharply to the individual who dares to be different. It is an act of self-defense on the part of the collective. But the self-reliant soul understands that the price of progress is the temporary loss of approval. You must be willing to be the villain in someone else's story, to be the hero in your own. Think of the immense psychological freedom that comes when you stop trying to explain yourself to everyone. We spend so much energy trying to be relatable, trying to translate our deepest intuitions into a vocabulary that the crowd can digest. But some truths are not meant to be digested easily. Some truths are meant to be wrestled with. Your genius is not a commodity that needs to be sold to the masses. It is a sacred fire that you must tend to in private. If the crowd understood you, they would own you. They would trim your edges and dye your colors until you looked just like them. The American spirit was forged by people who were misunderstood by the empires they left behind. They were called radicals, dreamers, and outcasts. But it was their refusal to be understood by the old world that allowed them to build a new one. In our modern era, being misunderstood has become even more difficult because we are constantly connected.
We feel the need to justify every action and explain every thought in real time. But Emerson's philosophy is a call to a certain independence of solitude, even in the midst of the crowd. It is the ability to hold your own truth so firmly that the confusion of others doesn't shake your foundation. If you are growing, if you are evolving, you will eventually outgrow the versions of yourself that people are comfortable with. They will remember the old you and be frustrated by the new you. They will call you inconsistent or weird or distant. But as Emerson said, Consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. If you are afraid to be misunderstood, you are afraid to grow. You are locking yourself in a cage built of other people's expectations. Real power comes from the realization that you do not owe the world an explanation for your soul. Your work, your art, and your life are your evidence. If the world is not ready for it yet, that is the world's problem, not yours. The stars do not apologize for being far away and cold. They simply shine. The mountain does not apologize for its height. It simply stands. You must become like the mountain, unshakable in your purpose, even when the clouds of misunderstanding obscure your peak. When you embrace being misunderstood, you gain a superpower. You become immune to the suffrage of the world. You no longer need the likes or the nods of approval to feel valid. You find a deeper validation that comes from the alignment of your actions with your internal vibration. This is the only greatness that matters. Everything else is just celebrity, and celebrity is just a fancy word for being understood by the wrong people for the wrong reasons. To be great is to be a pioneer of the spirit. It is to walk into the wilderness of thought where there are no maps and no guides. Of course, people will be confused when you return with news of what you found there. Of course, they will think you are crazy. But it is that very craziness that moves the needle of human history. The greatest accomplishments were all once considered impossible, and the greatest people were all once considered out of their minds. So, the next time you feel the sting of being misunderstood, the next time someone looks at you with confusion or judgment, do not shrink. Do not try to make yourself smaller or more understandable. Instead, lean into it. Realize that you are in good company. Realize that you have reached the boundary where the crowd ends and your greatness begins. Trust that the light you see is real, even if no one else sees it yet. For in the end, the world eventually catches up to the genius. It took centuries for the world to understand the stars, but the stars didn't wait for permission to shine. You are here to shine, not to be explained. Embrace the silence of being misunderstood, for in that silence, you are finally free to be yourself. Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind, and that integrity is never more visible than when you stand alone in your truth, perfectly at peace with being misunderstood by all.